Can a war movie become so disturbing that watching it feels almost like evidence from a crime scene? These are not the clean battlefield stories audiences were sold. These are the films that dragged war into torture rooms, ruined villages, collapsing mines, and places history tried to bury. Some were praised as masterpieces, others were attacked as exploitation. But one film on this list still makes viewers question whether cinema went too far. Number 15. Hamburger Hill, 1987. Some war movies show soldiers fighting for victory. This one shows them fighting for a hill that almost seems to hate them back. Hamburger Hill takes the Vietnam War and strips away any clean, heroic fantasy, focusing on the real Battle of Hill 937, where American troops were ordered into a savage uphill assault against deeply entrenched North Vietnamese forces. The film's power is not just in the gunfire or the mud-soaked chaos, but in the sickening repetition of it all. Climb, fall, bleed, regroup, and climb again. Every step feels pointless, and that is exactly why it hits so hard. The soldiers are not painted as symbols. They are exhausted young men trapped between military orders, public anger back home, and a battlefield that consumes bodies with terrifying indifference. What makes it feel adult and brutal is its honesty about war as a machine. By the end, the hill becomes less a location and more a question. Who decided this was worth it? Number 14. Das Boot, 1981. This is not a war film that explodes outward. It locks you inside a steel coffin and waits for panic to do the damage. Das Boot follows a German U-boat crew during World War II, but instead of turning submarine warfare into sleek adventure, it makes every dripping pipe, every alarm, and every silent depth charge feel like a slow psychological collapse. The genius of the film is its claustrophobia. You are not watching soldiers charge across open fields. You are watching men trapped under the ocean, sweating, waiting, and listening for the sound that could end them. The crew is humanized without glorifying the cause they serve, which gives the film its unsettling moral tension. It becomes a story about fear, obedience, survival, and the way war reduces even trained men into frightened bodies in a machine. Its adult intensity comes from pressure, not gore. Few war films make breathing feel this dangerous, and that is why Das Boot still feels merciless. Number 13. The Killing Fields, 1984. The most disturbing thing about The Killing Fields is how quietly horror arrives before it becomes impossible to escape. Set during the rise of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the film follows journalist Sidney Schanberg and Cambodian interpreter Dith Pran as political collapse turns into mass terror. This is not battlefield spectacle in the usual sense. It is war as disappearance, forced labor, ideological madness, and the slow erasure of ordinary life. What makes the film so gripping is its shift from foreign correspondent urgency into something far more personal and devastating. Dith Pran's survival becomes the emotional center, showing how war does not only kill bodies, it attacks names, memory, language, and identity. The film's violence is painful because it is tied to real history and real human loss. It does not need constant shock to feel unbearable. Its power comes from restraint, from silence, and from the terrible realization that civilization can collapse faster than anyone wants to believe. Number 12. The Beast of War, 1988. A lost tank in enemy territory should sound like an action setup, but this film turns it into a moving prison full of paranoia and revenge. The Beast of War is set during the Soviet-Afghan War and follows a Soviet tank crew stranded in hostile terrain after committing brutal acts against an Afghan village. From that point forward, the film becomes a tense survival nightmare where the desert feels endless and every decision tightens the trap. What makes it stand out is the internal war inside the tank itself. The commander is ruthless, the crew begins to fracture, and the machinery meant to protect them becomes a symbol of moral decay. The film is not just about being hunted, it is about what happens when soldiers realize they may be trapped with something worse than the enemy outside. Its adult intensity comes from cruelty, guilt, and psychological pressure. By the end, the tank feels less like a weapon and more like a coffin on tracks. Number 11. Stalingrad, 1993. If most war films show men entering battle, Stalingrad shows them being swallowed by it piece by piece. This German film follows soldiers sent to one of the most catastrophic battles of World War II, where patriotism, orders, and illusions of glory collapse under freezing weather, starvation, and endless Soviet resistance. What makes it so haunting is the way it begins with soldiers who still believe in structure and purpose, then gradually strips them of everything: warmth, loyalty, certainty, even the belief that survival has meaning. The battlefield is not romanticized. It is filthy, frozen, chaotic, and spiritually empty. The film's mature force lies in its refusal to make war feel noble or clean. Every scene seems to ask whether these men are still soldiers or simply victims of a machine they once trusted. Stalingrad works because it does not chase shock for entertainment. It shows defeat as a slow human disintegration, and that makes it deeply punishing. Number 10. Welcome to Sarajevo, 1997. This film hurts because it does not feel like ancient history. It feels like a news report that suddenly starts bleeding. Welcome to Sarajevo takes viewers into the Bosnian War through the eyes of foreign journalists covering the siege of Sarajevo, where civilians live under sniper fire, shelling, hunger, and political abandonment. Unlike traditional war films built around generals and missions, this one focuses on witnesses, people with cameras, notebooks, fear, and guilt. The most powerful tension comes from the question of whether observing suffering is ever enough. As journalists document the horror, the line between professional distance and moral responsibility begins to crack. The film captures a city trying to remain human while surrounded by destruction, where children, families, and ordinary streets become targets. Its adult intensity comes from realism and helplessness rather than spectacle. Welcome to Sarajevo is disturbing because it forces the viewer to confront not only war crimes, but the world's ability to watch them happen. Number 9. Europa, Europa, 1990. Some war stories terrify you with explosions. This one terrifies you with identity itself. Europa, Europa follows Solomon Perel, a Jewish teenager who survives World War II by hiding in plain sight, passing as an ethnic German and eventually becoming absorbed into the machinery of Nazi youth culture. That premise alone feels almost impossible, but what makes the film so gripping is the constant tension of exposure. Every conversation becomes dangerous, every uniform becomes a disguise, every moment of survival carries the fear that one wrong word, one private detail, or one physical discovery could end everything. The film is disturbing not because it is the bloodiest war movie on this list, but because it turns survival into a moral and psychological trap. Solomon is not simply escaping death. He is forced to perform loyalty to the very ideology hunting him. That contradiction gives the film its adult intensity. Europa, Europa becomes a nightmare about war stealing a person's name, faith, body, and truth. Number 8. Heaven and Earth, 1993. The battlefield is only half the wound in this film. The other half follows a woman long after the guns stop firing. Oliver Stone's Heaven and Earth tells the Vietnam War through the life of Le Ly Hayslip, a Vietnamese woman caught between armies, ideologies, occupation, family loyalty, and survival. Unlike many Vietnam films centered on American soldiers, this one forces the audience to look at the war through civilian trauma, especially the experience of a woman whose life is repeatedly shaped by forces far beyond her control. The film's intensity comes from emotional damage rather than simple combat spectacle. Villages become political battlegrounds, families are torn between suspicion and fear, and survival often demands choices no human being should have to make. Stone gives the story a sweeping, painful quality, showing how war follows people into marriage, memory, exile, and identity. Heaven and Earth stands out because it asks a harder question. After history destroys your world, how do you rebuild yourself? Number 7. Platoon, 1986. This is the Vietnam War, with the heroism scraped off and the moral rot left exposed. Oliver Stone's Platoon follows Chris Taylor, a young American soldier whose idealism is crushed inside a unit divided by fear, rage, drugs, exhaustion, and two very different kinds of leadership. The jungle is dangerous, but the real horror comes from what the men begin doing to each other and to themselves. Sergeant Elias represents damaged humanity trying to survive with some moral line intact, while Sergeant Barnes becomes the face of war as pure brutality. That internal conflict gives the film its lasting power. It is not simply America versus Vietnam. It is conscience versus survival, innocence versus corruption, and brotherhood versus breakdown. The violence feels harsh because it carries emotional consequence. Stone, drawing from his own Vietnam experience, turns the platoon into a small, collapsing society where every choice stains someone. Platoon remains unforgettable because it makes victory feel irrelevant when the soul has already been lost. Number 6. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Before this film takes you to Vietnam, it shows how war first invades the human mind. Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket is split into two brutal halves: the transformation of recruits at Paris Island and the surreal violence of combat in Vietnam. The first half may be one of cinema's coldest portraits of dehumanization, as young men are broken down, renamed, insulted, reshaped, and turned into weapons before they ever reach a battlefield. By the time the story moves overseas, the viewer already understands the damage has begun long before the first firefight. Kubrick's war is not chaotic in a traditional way. It is controlled, absurd, mechanical, and deeply unsettling. The soldiers speak in jokes because sincerity would make the horror unbearable. The film's adult force comes from its psychological cruelty, its bitter humor, and its refusal to give easy emotion. Full Metal Jacket is not just about war destroying men. It is about a system teaching them to destroy themselves first. Number 5. Casualties of War, 1989. Some war films ask who survives the enemy. This one asks who survives their own side. Brian De Palma's Casualties of War is one of the most morally painful Vietnam films ever made, because its horror does not come from a traditional battlefield alone. It follows Private Erickson, played by Michael J. Fox, as he witnesses fellow American soldiers commit a violent crime against a Vietnamese civilian woman, and then faces the terrifying cost of speaking out. Sean Penn's performance adds a chilling layer, turning military authority and group pressure into something predatory and poisonous. The film is hard to watch because it strips away the comfortable idea that uniforms automatically represent honor. Instead, it shows what can happen when fear, racism, power, and impunity combine in a war zone. Its intensity is emotional and ethical, not just physical. Casualties of War matters because it refuses to let the audience hide behind patriotic distance. It says the worst battlefield can sometimes be the human conscience. Number 4. Schindler's List, 1993. This film does not shock you like a nightmare. It devastates you like a historical record that refuses to blink. Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List follows Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who begins as an opportunist and gradually becomes the unlikely protector of Jewish workers during the Holocaust. Shot mostly in stark black and white, the film feels less like conventional drama and more like memory carved into cinema. Its power comes from contrast: bureaucratic calm beside mass terror, ordinary rooms beside impossible cruelty, profit beside conscience. The violence is not treated as spectacle. It is presented as the collapse of morality inside a system designed to make murder administrative. Liam Neeson gives Schindler ambiguity and humanity, while Ralph Fiennes creates one of the most chilling portraits of casual power in war cinema. The film's adult intensity comes from grief, historical weight, and moral horror. Schindler's List is not only about saving lives, it is about realizing how many lives the world allowed to be destroyed. Number 3. Savior, 1998. This is the kind of war film that does not shout its horror. It lets hatred rot slowly until every act of survival feels morally infected. Savior takes the Bosnian War and turns it into a bleak, punishing journey through ethnic violence, revenge, guilt, and reluctant humanity. Dennis Quaid plays a damaged American mercenary who has already lost his moral center before the story truly begins, joining the conflict not as a noble hero, but as a man hollowed out by rage. What makes the film so disturbing is the way it refuses to make war feel distant or orderly. Villages become traps. Civilians become targets. Identity becomes dangerous. The violence is not presented as stylish action. It feels ugly, personal, and emotionally contaminated. At the center is a Serbian woman and her newborn child, forcing the main character to confront the humanity he has spent the war trying to bury. Savior fits this list because it is not just brutal in what it shows, it is brutal in what it asks. Can a man soaked in war still choose mercy, or has war already chosen for him? Number 2. Come and See, 1985.
This is not a film you simply watch. It feels like surviving a fever dream made out of history. L.M. Klimov's Come and See follows a young Belarusian boy named Flyora as he is pulled into the nightmare of Nazi occupation during World War II. At first, he imagines resistance as adventure, but the film slowly destroys that fantasy with a force that is almost unbearable. What makes Come and See so stunning is its sensory assault. Distorted sound, haunted faces, mud, smoke, silence, panic, and the boy's expression changing as if childhood is being burned away in real time. The violence is devastating because the film keeps returning to civilians, villages, families, and the helplessness of people trapped inside genocidal war. It does not give the viewer heroic relief or clean emotional escape. It drags the audience into the psychological ruin of witnessing evil too directly. Come and See is often called one of the greatest anti-war films ever made, because it understands something terrifying. War does not create adventure. It manufactures ghosts.
Number 1. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. The most disturbing war film on this list does not feel like entertainment. It feels like cinema daring you to look away. Men Behind the Sun is a Hong Kong historical exploitation film about Unit 731, the secret Japanese military program that conducted human experiments during World War II. Its reputation is infamous, not only because of the subject matter, but because of the film's extreme approach to depicting cruelty, dehumanization, and the machinery of wartime science stripped of conscience. Unlike many war films built around combat, this one moves into laboratories, prison spaces, military command, and the cold language of experimentation. That is what makes it feel so horrifying. The enemy is not only a soldier with a weapon, it is a system that turns human beings into objects. The film has long been debated as both historical condemnation and shock exploitation, and that debate is part of its dark legacy. Men Behind the Sun earns the number 1 spot because it represents war cinema at its most unbearable. When history becomes horror, and horror becomes almost impossible to separate from truth. These films are not easy watches, and that is exactly why they still matter. They do not turn war into clean heroism. They expose fear, cruelty, survival, and the human cost history often hides. Which film on this list disturbed you the most? Drop your pick below and subscribe for more cinema that dares to cross the line.